Hi, my name is Rick Edgeman. I'm professor and chair of the management department at Forte State University. I also hold appointments at Aarhus University in Denmark, the University of Southern Denmark, and with the Shingo Institute, home of the Shingo Prize for Operational Excellence. What we're going to do today in this video is we're going to give you an example that we carry it through in a few ways at least, using some of the tools and techniques that are talked about in some of the other videos. And some of those tools and techniques here would be a little bit about brainstorming, about affinity diagrams, interrelationship diagrams, the combination of matrix diagrams and nominal group technique, but also a little bit about concept generation, selection, and then quality function deployment. So at least for the first handful of those things, we'll talk about an example related to comment conventions. Not everything that we have to do is necessarily quantitative in nature. Some things are qualitative, and we can use some of the tools that are out there very purposefully to achieve great qualitative results. So in brainstorming, typically what we'd want to do is we would want to, and we've talked about brainstorming in other videos in greater depth, but typically we would want to seed the brainstorming process. In other words, what you're going to do is in advance you're going to have agreed what it is that you need to brainstorm about as a team. And you would have that written down somewhere very visibly for everyone who's on that team. But typically, we would try to seed the brainstorming process in the same way that in certain parts of the country, we used to seed clouds to try and make it rain. That was very common where I grew up in southern Colorado, where it was very dry. They would use chemicals to try and seed the clouds to make it rain so that there would be more water, especially for agricultural use. So that's what we're looking for, is to make it rain ideas. That's the idea behind seeding a brainstorming process. And some of the sorts of ways that you might seed, you might use some sort of a random sentence or random paragraph, maybe some small music clip or sound clip, maybe some sort of a seed image, a taste, a smell. So many ways that you can stimulate the idea generation process, the brainstorming process. But we would seed it with, let's say, some sort of an image and maybe a seed paragraph companions. The image, the paragraph, those other possible stimulants need not necessarily have any direct connection to whatever it is that you're going to be brainstorming about. So this would be an example. If you've seen some of the other videos, you may have seen this paragraph. It's a fictional dialogue between two historic figures. Richard de Clare, known as Strongbow, who was the Norman knight who led the 12th century conquest of Ireland by the Normans, and his wife Aoife, his Irish wife Aoife, who was the daughter of an Irish chieftain. And so she opened up by saying, "Our Irish warriors are as good as any of yours." And he said, "Maybe, yeah, maybe. But guess what we have? We have superior methods of transportation. We have superior weaponry and people who are more adept at using that weaponry. We have superior organization. We have unity of purpose. And in contrast, your people fight one by one, each according to their own desires. They don't have any unity of purpose. They don't have any superior organization. They don't necessarily have the same weaponry or same modes of transportation. And so it doesn't matter how many you have, they can't overcome 100 of ours because 100 of ours have all those advantages." At least that's the way that I read what Richard de Clare had to say. He said, "Perhaps your Irish warriors are as good as any of ours, but we have knights on horseback and skilled archers, and our men fight in one unit following one order. The Irish fight man by man, each according to his own desire. They cannot overcome 100 men all following the same order." But the purpose of having a dialogue or a paragraph like that would be to give people on the team that's going to be brainstorming a little bit of time to read and think about that paragraph. And presumably, since they have whatever it is they're going to be brainstorming about written down somewhere very visible to them, they're probably going to start making some connections between the two. And that's the purpose of having that seed paragraph, seed dialogue, seed image, okay, Here's the image I'm using, a short video clip, to have that to start stimulating the brainstorming process. Now, usually what happens, by the way, in brainstorming is that the initial ideas in brainstorming tend to be very far away from an ultimate solution, but they tend to hone in on a solution fairly quickly. So, and somehow, some way, we want to see the brainstorming process. Here I chose to combine a unit of composed of a paragraph or a small dialogue and some sort of an image, in this case a short video clip. Now, in this case, the team was brainstorming about what might we do for the comic convention that we want to hold. And ordinarily, if you're familiar with comic conventions, then here's what you know. You know that you tend to have authors that are there, that are having their books sold or their comic book art or whatever the case may be. So you tend to have authors, you tend to have artists, you tend to have vendors of books, of t-shirts, of magic wands, or whatever the case may be. So you tend to have merchandise, authors, artists. You tend to have people who play a particular role in movies or on television. And you tend to have a lot of people who attend these comic conventions to do what's called cosplay, to dress up like some of their favorite characters and to live out part of their fantasy life, let's say. It's actually very entertaining. If you've never been to one, it's really interesting and enjoyable, I would say, to go to these things. And I've been to one very large one, enjoyed it tremendously. But there is a lot of money that is invested in these things. These things can be major boost to a local economy because you have all the transportation of people that are coming in. So you have airlines and buses and railways and so on. Rental car agencies, they're making money. The hotels are making money. The restaurants in the area are making money. The convention center is making money. The authors that you bring to the comic convention, the actors, the artists, the vendors, the merchandise vendors, all of those are making money. And the impact of a very large one, such as the original one in San Diego, on an economy can easily run hundreds of millions of dollars for one comic convention. So don't discount the topic and say, oh, that's amusing. This is a big money topic. So here were some of the ideas that the organizing committee, let's say, for the comic convention threw out. And you see a lot of names that you might recognize if you're a fan of science fiction or of historical fiction or something of that sort. I am. So you see, probably as you peruse this list, you see some of the Norse gods or the Marvel comic book heroes, like Thor is on there. You see some characters from Harry Potter. You see some DC comic characters. You see some ones from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. You see probably some from Game of Thrones. You see different authors' names and character names and so on. So that's what you're probably seeing. But there's a relative amount of chaos. And so what we would then want to do is have the team, having now generated all these ideas, go through a process of finding relationships among the ideas. And they would do that perhaps, excuse me, by sorting them into so-called affinity groupings. The way that would typically happen is that you would have all of these ideas spread out just in random order, as you see here. And then the team would stand around the desk or flat surface where these are laid out, maybe on 3x5 index cards, or maybe they're on Post-it notes and they're on the wall or something of that sort. And the team would stand around and somebody would grab one of those Post-it notes, let's say, and place it near another one of those Post-it notes. And people would begin sorting. Now, there are some general rules for doing this. You sort in silence, you don't give dirty looks, anything like that. If somebody moves something and you don't think it should be where they moved it, you have the opportunity. Move it somewhere else. That sort of thing could happen several times. You move it, they move it. You move it, they move it. Somebody else moves it somewhere else. If that continues to go on, you can always make a duplicate. Maybe for some reason it belongs in both areas. Because guess what? You're individual members and you have different thought processes going on, even though you hope that those coalesce into sort of a single message in the end. So what we might do is we went through the brainstorming process, ideation. We want to sort into affinity groupings. Here's a picture from the Minneapolis Wizard World Comic Con from 2016. And maybe that's what we see. So these are the same things that you saw just a minute ago, the random ideas, but now sorted by the team. We have a DC Comics area. We have comic book characters. They're sitting over in that left-hand side with the blue parts. So what do we have? Those separated into two different subgroupings. Okay, DC comic heroes, Marvel comic heroes. You see that you had down at the bottom, you had some Indiana Jones characters, and an author. You see Lord of the Rings, and what else? Lord of the Rings and its author, J.R.R. Tolkien. And then you see the Chronicles of Narnia characters, and I'm sure covered up by the video that you see in the bottom corner, probably C.S. Lewis, the author of those things. The Chronicles of Narnia, that is. You see Game of Thrones, its author, and some of the key characters that are listed near the top. At the bottom, you see some Harry Potter ones, the author and characters, and you see a few other things that are in there. Another author, Orson Scott Card, one of the things he authored, Ender's Game. You see Hunger Games, Suzanne Collins, its author, Interview with the Vampire, Anne Rice. And then in the middle, you see some of the other authors and some of the genres, at least, where they authored things. So all of those would have been ideas. And then what's going to happen is that the organizing committee for this comic convention are going to have to decide which of those areas to emphasize. Because in the end, they will invite, let's say, characters who played on television or in movies. Some of those, maybe DC comic characters, let's say, or maybe some of the characters from Marvel, or maybe they identify some of the actors who played in Lord of the Rings and invite those. They're going to identify some authors that they want to invite to participate in the comic convention, or they might even want to just identify some genre. So when you look over there at other popular authors, themes, and books that's sitting right in the middle of this graphic, you see angels, adventure, horror, suspense, demons. Well, they might like to invite some of the regional authors who may not be particularly well known, but they're regional authors. They can come, they can promote their books or whatever the case may be, and have them come, even if they're not well known. So they're going to use this information strategically to structure the content and organization of their Comic Con. There are things they would want to know. So what is it that makes a comic convention successful? So here are some things that they believe will make that convention successful. And I've identified 10 things, A through J. So cosplay opportunities. If you've ever gone to one of these things, you know the cosplay is it's a big draw for people who come. Movies and characters emphasized. Which movies are emphasized, or which series are emphasized? So maybe it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe or something like that. So which movies, which characters? Which television series, which characters? Which book series, books or book series, which characters? And so on. So these are some of the factors that they would look at. And then they would probably try and prioritize those and say, well, you know, this factor is the most important, this is the next most important, this one isn't very important, and so on. Some of these things we have control over, some of these things we don't. So what we might want to do is see if we can identify relationships among those factors. And to do that, there are different tools that are available, one of which is referred to as the interrelationship digraph. In a relationship digraph, we had those 10 things we just identified, A through J, whatever those were. And notice that in that first row, the row for A, what you would be doing is this. You would be asking, does A cause A? does a thing cause itself? No, we always leave the things that are on the diagonal that proceeds from upper left to lower right. Those cells are blank, and you'll notice that. But then otherwise, as we go across, we would ask the question, does A cause B? If the answer is yes, you would have an up arrow going toward B. Okay, but we don't have an up arrow going toward B. That was left blank initially. Does A cause C? No. The answer is no. That was left blank. Does A cause D? No. It was left blank. E? No. It was left blank. F? No relationship. G? No. It was left blank. So I'm going to have to tell you in just a second how it is that you came back later and filled in those arrows that point from B, C, D, E, and G toward A in that first row. But notice for H, I, and J, you see up arrows. What that means is that when we ask the question, does A cause H? The answer was yes. We put in an arrow pointing from A to H. Okay. What that means is that when you get to the other column, A and H, you're going to have an in arrow pointing toward H. That is, A causes H. A causes H. Okay. So notice that at the end of the evaluation of A, we found that there were 5 in arrows, 3 out arrows, 8 total arrows. That means that there were 5 different things that contributed to causing A, 3 things that A contributed to causing, H, I, and J, and in total 8 relationships. You do something similar for each of B through J. When we get around to the analysis, the sort of thing that we're looking for, we'll then next focus on these arrows. And what you're looking for is you're looking for a lot of in arrows, or a lot of out arrows, or total arrows. If I have a lot of out arrows, as I do for D and E, what that would say is those things each are responsible for causing a lot of things. They are key enablers. They are key things that make other things happen. You better get them right. At the same time, if I had, let's say, a lot of in arrows, as it looks like I probably do down here, it looks like for J I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in arrows. Well, what that says is that you have a lot of things causing J. J is a potential bottleneck. You better get it right, okay? Because it can stop up a lot of things from happening. So a lot of out arrows, key enablers. A lot of in arrows, potential bottleneck. A lot of arrows in total, a little bit of both. Okay, what would we do next maybe? Well, we might need to decide at some point in time what it is we choose to emphasize. So we combine, let's say, as we did in one of the other videos that you may have watched, the nominal group technique and so-called L-shaped matrices. Nominal group technique is a group decision-making tool, and it is very easy to identify whether you're in general agreement or disagreement, and if it appears that you're in general disagreement, then it's usually possible to identify if there's some simple explanation, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the steps would be to generate the list of issues, problems, or solutions to be prioritized. Okay, let's suppose that that was A through J that we were just looking at for the common convention example. Write those statements on a flip chart or board very, very visibly. So I would write down what those things were. And then next to it, I would put the letters A through J, okay, just for simplicity. We would talk about it, we'd clarify the meanings, we'd make sure that everybody was on the same page as to what those things meant. We'd record our final list, so let's say it was the A through J as you saw it. And then each member of that organizing committee for this common comment convention would record corresponding letters, the A through J, on a big piece of paper, and they would rank order those. Bigger is better. So if they gave H a 10, well, to them that was most important. If they gave A a 1, that was least important. Okay, but no ties allowed, all things ranked. So if you have 10 things you're ranking as we do here, A through J, you would be ranking those from 1 through 10, where bigger is more important. So it's the 10 that's most important, the one that's least important. and then we combine the ranks of all the team members. So when we did that, suppose we had 4 team members, Karan, Rahim, Soren, and Camilla. And for A, Karan said that's not very important, Rahim not very important, Soren not very important, Camilla not very important. Add those up, they add to 10. On the other hand, it looks like they all felt that whatever B is, that B was important. Okay, we left a couple things out. We left out H, we left out J. For some reason, we probably felt like those were, go back and look at their descriptions, things that we actually couldn't control. And since we couldn't control them, at least not directly, we decided to leave those out of this ranking system. Okay, out of the prioritization that we're going through right now. Because that's what we're doing right now, is we are using the nominal group technique to help us prioritize those things that we actually have decisions that can be made about, which would be A through G and I of the original A through J that we listed a few slides back. And we're ranking those. Well, look here. For B, whatever B was, 3 out of the 4 people rated that as most important, and the remaining person is the next to most important. And it looks like B and C were the things that scored out highest. So in fact, they got 31 out of a total of 144, and 29 out of 144. That's 21.5% and 20.1% of the overall totals. If I am spreading out, let's say 20 points worth of weight, I could spread out 10 points worth of weight, 20 points, 50 points, 100 points. That's up to you, completely up to you. Typical would be 10, maybe 100, but just to give you an alternative, I've thrown out 20 here. So if I multiply 6.9%, 0.069, times the 20 points I want to distribute, that's 1.38. 21.5%, 0.215 of the 20 points, 4.3, and so on. And then I'll round, and here would be my weights. 1, 4.3 rounds to 4, 4, 3, 3, 1, 3, and so on. Then what that would end up saying is something like, you know, we really want to emphasize B and C. After that, D, E, and G would be important to us. These remaining 3 are not so important. Okay. So F not so important, A not so important, I not very important. If we can do those conveniently, that's one thing. But if we can't, then it's not going to hurt us much if we decide not to look at those at all. So there would be sort of your common convention concept, is that you would have said, here's what we want to emphasize, and it would have been the 5 that we identified. Okay, let's look at an illustration of concept generation and selection. You've seen concept generation in a separate video if you've been watching some of these videos, and the same with concept selection. Let's just get sort of a redo on that, looking at a little bit of an example in any case. So all you're going to be looking at is this red box. Concept generation, this red box. And it starts with the idea that you have previously identified your customer needs. You've previously looked at whatever is available out there in the marketplace. And now you're ready to develop your concept to put out to the marketplace. So make sure that you understand your problem. Search internally and externally. Searching internally would be looking at what it is that you as an individual on the team know, what the other individuals on the team know, and collectively what you know. Searching externally, that would be looking at things like trade publications, patents, things of that sort, competing products that are already out there. And what we're trying to do when we do this is say, what are some new ideas that we can bring to the table? What are some existing things that are already out there that are useful? And can we combine those? Can we explore systematically? And a lot of times we do that with a technique that you're going to be seeing over the next few slides. And then we'll review the solution to see if it was a reasonable one. Once we've generated a few concepts, then we would use some sort of a concept selection technique to get to the one that we really want. So here's a quick and dirty example. Let me pull some pens over here. I have a wide variety of pens. It seems like I pick up a pen everywhere I go. Not necessarily intentionally, it just sort of happens. So here are 4 pens. Here are 4 pens from the original Legoland. 3 of those are Star Wars themed. The other one is just some sort of generic Lego. So these come from Billund, Denmark. As it turns out, I'm supposed to be able to twist these to expose the point. I noticed yesterday that no amount of twisting exposed any of the points on these, but let's suppose that worked. What do I like about these, apart from the fact that I'm sort of a fantasy and science fiction fan, so I do like Star Wars. Here's Yoda. What I like about this, regardless, in fact, any of these pens, would be the grip. So the grip is more or less triangular, which I like. It seems to work for my hand quite well. Not that you can probably see it, but there are 3 depressions, one on each of the triangular faces, so that my fingertips fit inside there very well. Okay. And it's a rubber grip, so it's not going to slip from between my hands. So as I'm designing a pen, I might think about what's the grip, what's the material that this is made out of, what's the shape of the grip, how do I expose the point. Those are just a few things that we might do. And then something like, oh, let's see, material. Maybe I want to use plastic, maybe I want to use rubber, maybe I want to use metal, maybe I want to use wood, maybe I want to use cardboard for something recyclable. Okay, so there are a lot of possibilities. Here's one. This one was a gift from Toyota when I toured one of their manufacturing plants in Japan. So on this one, it is just a cover that exposes the tip. Personally, I don't like writing with this pen very much because it's very small and it's a little bit slick, small in diameter for the barrel of the pen. So small in diameter doesn't work well for me. What do I like about it? Well, I think it's a good looking pen, so it's aesthetically pleasing to me. And if you've looked at something like Garvin's Dimensions of Quality, being aesthetically pleasing, the beauty contest, if you will, can be important for some customers. What else do I like about it? Well, not that I've used it this way, but as I look at this, and I don't know how well you can see the tip, but it's more or less a tip that if I wanted, I could do something like clean out my ears or who knows what. But the idea that I'm trying to get out there, and it's a very useful idea when you're designing any product, is to always think about not necessarily just the primary use of whatever it is that you're designing that product for, but possible secondary uses and tertiary uses. People will always find additional uses for a given product. You know, as a typical example, representative of the age in which I grew up, and I grew up mostly in the late 50s and through the 60s. It was very common that you had people like my father that when you emptied out a pickle jar or something like that, they'd take that jar and they'd use it and they'd store nuts and bolts and nails and screws and things like that in. Well, the intent of that jar was to hold the pickles. But people like my dad, and there were lots of them, found a secondary use for that. Always think about that because that might just be the selling point that gets your product selected over some other product. So let's see, what else do I have? I might want to know, how is it that I'm going to put the pen in my pocket? So am I using a clip? What is it that I'm doing? So I want to consider that. These 2 pens, both of which come from a place that I used to be employed full-time, the Shingo Institute, when I was its research director. These 2 pens both have a clip. The total length of the pen is equal and the length of the clip is equal. The design of the clips are different, and you can probably see that the green pen looks like it sticks up higher. Well, it does, at least from the top of the clip. So what does that mean? It means that this one is going to stick up higher above, let's say, the shirt pocket than this one will. Desirable? Yes, no. Depends on the individual. So a lot of considerations here. So what would a product concept look like? If we just consider three of the factors that we were just talking about. How do we cover the point? Maybe we use a cap. Maybe it twists in and out. Maybe it is just, does this one work? No. Here's one. Maybe it is just clickable. So how do we cover the point? So we have one factor, three possibilities. The factor is how do we cover the point? Here are three possibilities for that. A second factor might be something like, what does the grip shape look like? Tapered, triangular, octagonal, is it round? What material are we going to use? Rubber, plastic, wood, metal, cardboard? So what you would have is that every way of covering the point combined with a way or a selection for the grip shape and a selection for the material forms a single concept. So here we had three ways to cover the point, four different grip shapes, and five different materials. We would have 3 times 4 times 5, which is 60. 60 different product concepts. And you can see what all of those are here. The job subsequently for the team would be to say, which of those product concepts am I going to select? And that's what we would look for. And we talked about ways to do that in some prior video, including screening and scoring matrices. So in screening and scoring matrices, all we did is we took a concept among several that we may have advanced, and we chose that to be the standard. Of the other ones under consideration, we would have several criteria that we identify. Criteria should be described in approximately equal detail. Each concept should be described in approximately equal detail. One of those should be designated as the standard. Maybe it's an existing product, or if not, just pick one arbitrarily. It doesn't matter so much which one. Designate that as the standard. How does the standard, in this case let's call it A, how does it compare to itself on each criteria? Well, it's the same. So we're going to do a 3-point comparison. Same, worse, or better. Same gets a 0, worse gets a negative, ultimately a -1, and better gets a positive, ultimately a +1. So for B, what we can see is that concept B was better than A, better than the standard, on criteria 1, on criteria 2, on criteria 4, similar on criteria 3 and 6, and it was worse on criteria 5. In all, we had 3 positives, 2 zeros, 1 negative. That's +1, +2, +3, 2 zeros, -1, they add to 2. And you could look across and do that for each of these. And then what we would do is we would get a net score out of these. Now, there are some things that we need to consider. Just because something has the highest number doesn't necessarily mean it's the best design, because we're not looking at how much better or how much worse. We're not looking at these criteria as being differentiable from one another. We're treating them as though they're equally important. And the reality is, you know, I know, we know, the whole world knows that they're not equally important. So we haven't taken into consideration any sort of weighting. And our comparison scale is crude. Better, worse, similar. So we're using usually these net scores down here only as crude guidance to try and get us to a reduced number of concepts that we will then consider much more thoroughly. So if you're doing that, you're probably going to look at, for example, H looks like it's probably okay. It's got 4 positive signs. Here's another one with 4 positive signs, F. They're not the same signs, necessarily the same criteria that they score a plus and minus on. So there are different things, but ultimately we want to be able to rank those. The lowest score gets the lowest rank. We had 8 of these. So, or did we? A through G and also H, so we had 8 concepts. And We would say the highest score should be advanced, and maybe the next highest score, and maybe the top few, but you probably wouldn't advance the bottom few. So you're always trying to arrive at a judgment that says, are you going to advance this concept further? Maybe the answer is no, maybe the answer is yes. Maybe it's combined with some other concept and then move that combined concept forward. And maybe it's take the concept as it is, but do some redefinition of it, some redefining. Change it a little bit, and then move forward. So those are the types of considerations that we're looking for, but ultimately we're trying to reduce the number that we consider further. Okay. And once we do that, we will probably move from concept screening, which is the process we just used, to concept scoring. Concept scoring is more refined in a lot of ways. First, you may or may not be using the same criteria or a subset of the criteria you had. You're probably using some things that are related to the criteria you had, but whatever you have now, whatever they are, one, they will be more thoroughly defined. They'll be clarified. They'll be in much greater detail. Okay, much greater detail, but at approximately equal levels of detail with one another. Second, we will weight the criteria. They are not all equally important. So the team, hopefully taking into account the desires of the customers, would weight those criteria, total weight adding up to 1. And we see that the most important criteria here happen to be criteria 1, or 1 prime, whatever you want to call it. 0.35, a third of the weight. And you see that criteria 3 was second most important, a quarter of the weight. You see that criteria 5, not so important, only 5% of the weight. What concepts? Let's suppose we move forward with BD. What that would mean is that your old B and your old D, that you've gone through some sort of a process to combine those, and we decided to use that as our reference. Or you see C plus, F plus, H plus, what that would say is that these were the original concepts, C, F, and H, that have been refined. Okay, refined. That's what the plus sign indicates. Next, we're going to use a more detailed scale. Instead of just a better than, worse than, similar to scale, +1, -1, or 0, we will use a 1 through 5 scale when we compare each concept to the standard. And by 1 through 5, 5 will be much better, 4 will be better, 3 will be similar or same, 2 will be worse, 1 will be much worse. So what we have here, when we compare the reference to itself, of course it is similar to or same as on every criteria, so 3s. How do we get these values? The 1.05, 0.60, 0.75, 0.45, 0.15 by multiplying the weights times the ratings. Those will add up to 3, and that would always be true for the reference. For C+, we said that on criteria 1, C+ was similar to the reference. It was better on criteria 2, similar on criteria 3, worse on criteria 4, much better on criteria 5, but criteria 5 was not a very important criteria. How do we get these weighted scores? In the same way, we multiply the ratings by the corresponding weights. That added up to 3.15. For F+, criteria 1, much better. Oh, well, that's good because that was the most important criteria. Criteria 2, much better. Criteria 3, better. Criteria 4, worse. Criteria 5, worse. Still, those added up to 4.15. And then we look at H+, and we see better, similar, much better, worse, better. So what would I be trying to do? It could be that you make a decision right now. Your decision might be that you go with this F+, it yielded the highest score. But if I were really going to be thorough about this, what I'd be asking myself is, okay, it does look like that stands apart from the others, but can I do even better still? So I might be looking at F+ and say, okay, let's look over here at H+. On that third criteria, which was the second most important criteria overall, H+ rated out as much better than the standard, whereas F+ only better. Is there something I can do to learn from H+ and incorporate here that would further strengthen H+. On criteria 4 and 5, F+ was worse than the standard. Well, if at all possible, what I'd try and do is the standard actually scored highest on that criteria. I would be looking at to say, is there anything I can learn from the standard design that I might be able to incorporate over here into F+? And similarly here, on the 5th criteria, C+ was much better. Is there something I can learn from that and incorporate here? And if not, maybe I can learn something from H+, because that was quite a bit better too. And if not, maybe I can even take whatever it was that was with the standard and incorporate. So I would try and keep refining this until I get the best possible design. And then let's take a little look at quality function deployment. We've looked at quality function deployment and its principal tool, the House of Quality, in another video. These were the main rooms in the so-called House of Quality. Customer needs, often called the what's. The hows, those are the design elements over which the enterprise has control, direct control. Those are called the hows. In other words, these are the things that are within our control that we can manipulate to try and satisfy the what's. The hows are intended to satisfy the what's. Not all customer needs, the what's, are equally important, so we would have importance rankings. Those importance rankings usually are on a 1 to 5 scale, with 5 being most important, 1 being least important. So you will have, ordinarily speaking, your importance ratings spread out from 1 to 5, no matter how many rankings or how many customer needs you have, rather. This is an important room right here, relationships between customer needs and design attributes, the what's, the hows, and normally would have in each cell here, for the relationship between a given customer need and a corresponding design attribute, we would either leave the cell blank if there was no relationship, or we would put in a symbol for a low relationship, a symbol for a moderate, low or weak, symbol for a moderate relationship, and a symbol for a high relationship or a strong relationship. Later, we'll substitute points or scores. 0 for no relationship, 1 for a weak, 3 for a moderate, 9 for a strong, but not yet. We will also want to know something about the correlation matrix up here. That's the relationship of the design elements with themselves. If generally they are synergistic, then you'd have a plus sign in any given cell. If there's no relationship between 2 design attributes, you would have, you'd leave that cell blank in the roof of the House of Quality, which is what we call this correlation matrix. And if they're actually in conflict with one another, then for any 2 design attributes where they were in conflict with one another, that is, where improving one leads to a decline in the other, then what that means is that you're going to have to determine what compromises that you're willing to make that would be in the best interest of fulfilling customer needs. And then the other rooms, well, these depend on who is quality together. These are the typical sorts of steps that you go through in building a house of quality. Identify those customer needs. There's the so-called satisfiers, the dissatisfiers, the exciters, delighters. Identify the relative importance of each of those needs. Identify the design attributes. Find the relationships between the design attributes, the hows, and the customer needs, the what's. Probably conduct an evaluation of competing products, because you want to carve out a market niche with whatever it is that you're designing. So how does what you're designing compare to what's already out there? Okay. So you would have, as just a simplified relationship, maybe something like this. So we would have, let's say, needs 1 through 5, design elements or design attributes 1 through 4. We would have relative importance ratings. I have the R's from room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4. I've got a room 5 on here somewhere. Room 6, room 7, room 8, room 9. So we would explain those in different ways. So you know we need to identify the needs. You know we need to have the relative importance ratings. You know that we need to identify the hows, or the design attributes, design elements. You know that we have to identify the relationships among those. But there are a few other things that we need to identify too. So I will end up talking to you about the raw completeness and the raw technical importance, the weighted completeness, the weighted technical importance. Most people who use the House of Quality and Quality Function Deployment focus on weighted completeness, weighted technical importance. I prefer raw completeness, raw technical importance. So what you would see here, the relationships. No relationship, weak relationship, moderate relationship, strong relationship. So I've just used a very simple symbolic representation for no relationship, weak relationship, moderate relationship, strong relationship. For importance rankings, let's suppose that if we only had 5 needs and we had rankings that we were willing to spread out from 1 to 5, that it worked out this way. Okay, then what we'd have, now I've substituted the points in the relationship part of the matrix. Substituting the points, what I would do next is I would, to obtain the weighted completeness and weighted technical importance, I would take the importance ratings times the corresponding values. So as I say, what is the weighted completeness for need 1? It is 4 times 0 plus 4 times 1 plus 4 times 1 plus 4 times 9, or 44 in all. Okay. For need number 2, that's 5 times 1 plus 5 times 1 plus 5 times 3 plus 5 times 9, 70. So what you would have, generally speaking, is the bigger the value, the more thoroughly you're able to fulfill the corresponding customer need. I prefer the raw completeness values, which would be to just add up the values of the relationships in the table. 0 plus 1 plus 1 plus 9 is 11. For need 2, 14. For need 3, 15. For need 4, 11. For need 5, 16. Need 5 is the one we're going to be able to best fulfill. Unfortunately, it's not the most important need. It's only in the middle. Okay, similarly down here in weighted technical importance, how did we get the, well, let's say the 31 here in yellow. Again, it is taking the importance ratings times the corresponding strength values. 4 times 1 plus 5 times 1 plus 2 times 9 plus 1 times 1 plus 3 times 1. 31. The bigger the value, the more important that design attribute is to fulfilling customer needs across the array of customer needs. So you see, for example, here that design element number 4 is very important. Okay, design element 4, very important. Okay, now what I actually prefer, again, is I prefer not the weighted values, but the raw values, where I would just add up the strengths. So for design element 1, that's 0 plus 1 plus 3 plus 0 plus 3 is 7. For design element 2, 13. For design element 3, 19. For design element 4, 28. Singly considered, we can see that design element 4 is the most important. Unfortunately for us, it doesn't do anything for us on need number 3 or need number 4. Right? Very little. No relationship to need number 3, a weak relationship to need number 4. On the bright side, those were the least important needs. Okay. But how about if there were some relationships, including some conflict among the design elements? Something like what we see here, and again, I'm sorry that part of this matrix is covered up, but what we see is design element 1 is synergistic with design element 2, with design element 3, but in conflict with design element 4. Design element 2, well, it positive related to 1, positive related to 3, no relationship to 4. Design element 3, we know its relationship. It's positive with 1, it's positive with 2, and I don't know what it's negative with D4, design element 4. And with design element 4, we know what that is. It's inversely related negatives. Inversely related to 1 and to 3. It's unrelated to D4. Well, now you're going to have some discussion, because by themselves, design element 2 and design element 3 were able to accomplish some good things for you. But unfortunately, they are negatively related to design element 4, meaning you would have to make trade-offs, or you'd have to decide that maybe you'll emphasize design element 4, but you won't use the other 2 design elements at all, or you'll use a combined, some sort of a combination of the others, but not use design element 4, even though separately considered it's most important. You would have to have those sorts of considerations, those sorts of discussions that you have. Okay, so purpose of the house of quality to carry the voice of the customer all the way through the process, all the way from concept to delivery to the marketplace. And then there is lastly the idea of so-called Qfd flow down, which is to say that Qfd is rarely just a single house of quality. In a manufacturing environment, it's as many as 4 successive ones. In software development, 3 successive ones. In service development, 3 successive ones. But in each case, what happens is that the how in one house of quality becomes the what in the next one. So if we look at the manufacturing environment, you start out with the customer needs. And I would say if you're really being thoughtful, it would be customer, societal, and ecological needs you're considering as the what's and as the design elements for the hows. In the second house of quality, the design elements, which were previously the hows, become the what's. Part characteristics become the hows. In the third, part characteristics become the what's, the manufacturing process itself, the hows. And in the fourth house of quality, the manufacturing process become the what's, production requirements of the quality control plan become the hows, the standardization process, if you will. And you'd have a similar sort of flow running through software development or through service development. So this is a quick, relatively dirty and simplistic overview of a number of different tools and techniques. We talked about brainstorming, about organizing those brainstormed ideas using something like, say, an affinity diagram, finding relationships among them, cause and effect relationships, using something like an interrelationship diagram, being able to prioritize those ideas and to arrive at group consensus through a combination of matrix diagrams, the L-shaped matrix, and the nominal group technique. And then we also talked about concept generation, product, service, or software, concept generation, concept selection, and rolling out that concept, quality function deployment. So I hope this has been a little bit helpful to you, and hope to see you in some other video.